You're listening to LBC, it's 9 o'clock.
On your radio, on your phone, and here.
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC. This is LBC from Global. Leading Britain's conversation with Iain Dale.
A very good evening. It's 3 minutes past 9 here on LBC. Now, this is not a new subject to this programme. About 5 weeks ago, it was actually on an episode of Cross Question it was raised. It's the so-called loan charge. Now, imagine if you suddenly found out that Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs were pursuing you for back taxes going back maybe 20 years. Imagine you're a freelance contractor, maybe an agency nurse, who had conducted all of your tax affairs rigorously through an accountant, but you're still being pursued for tens of thousands of pounds. Well, there are tens of thousands of people like you who are facing imminent bankruptcy. If you're one of them, I want to hear from you. And if there's anyone who can defend the government's policy on this, well, you're a better person than me, Gunga Din, as the saying goes. And what I find quite astonishing is that the minister concerned here, Mel Stride, who, as I say, was on Cross Question, and we'll hear what he had to say when I spoke to him then, he is refusing to appear before the House of Lords Economic Committee. And they're not very pleased about this because they've asked him to appear on 3 different dates. He's refused all of them. He hasn't given alternative dates to go to the committee, and they are none too impressed. They're saying he's actually breaking the ministerial code. Well, he did join me, as I say, a few weeks ago on Cross Question, where I put to him the amount of negative comments I've received from listeners about the loan charge. This was his response.
There has for many years been schemes out there in which individuals have been receiving remuneration for employment, not as normal earnings, but actually in the way of a loan that hasn't really been a loan, and has been a scheme put in place to mean that the employer doesn't pay national insurance on the payment, the employee typically doesn't pay income tax or employee national insurance, so they're receiving far more and paying, in many cases, very little or no tax, compared to perhaps the person working next door who's doing it the proper way, who's paying a lot. So we have to...
We'll introduce a new law to make it for the future. How can you justify it being
because these schemes... No, it's not retrospective, because these schemes have always been ineffective. They have always not worked. None of them, under the definition of earnings. Well, no,
how can you justify
the schemes are not government schemes.
People going back 20 years?
Because if some time ago you entered into one of these disguised remuneration schemes where you're basically avoiding tax, and it was illegal at that time, there is no reason why we should not now collect that money, and that's exactly what we're doing. In fact,
these are people who are not accountants. Hold on. These are people who are just normal, hard-working people. They don't know anything about tax avoidance schemes.
The thing for anybody who's involved in a tax avoidance scheme, and if you go and enter into an arrangement and you end up receiving your salary or the loan or whatever it may be, and you find that there's very little tax that's been applied to it, a lot of people would look at that and say that doesn't quite look right. Why aren't I paying the right amount of tax?
System,
and in many cases, it has been.
Why didn't HMRC stop this in the past then? Why now?
HMRC has What has happened is that HMRC has been clamping down on this for many, many years. What HMRC said in 2016 is we will give everybody 3 years to come to us, to talk to us, to enter into an arrangement whereby you clean this arrangement up. If it's a genuine loan and you pay it off, then that's fine.
And people do that. They fill in the forms and then they never hear anything else.
If it's not, then please pay the tax that you should have paid in the first place. And what we're saying is that people have until April 2019. Now, on the point about people engaging with HMRC, we have come out recently and said that in the event that you're earning less than £50,000 a year, which will probably apply to many of the people that you're referring to, we will automatically allow a 5-year period for those payments of that back tax to be made.
Well, that was Mel Stride, the Financial Secretary to the Treasury and Paymaster General, talking to me a few weeks ago. He seems to have gone into hibernation on this issue since then, won't speak to the House of Lords Finance Committee. They say they've received, I've got a letter here from Michael Forsyth, former Conservative Cabinet Minister, who has written to Mel Stride saying, "I'm disappointed at your refusal to appear before the Finance Bills Subcommittee on the Powers of HMRC on Monday the 5th of November. In the course of our current inquiry, the subcommittee has received evidence alleging severe failures of oversight over HMRC enforcement. According to personal accounts submitted to the subcommittee, these have had a destructive effect on the health, families and employment prospects of individuals." The letter goes on. If you want to see it, it's all over Twitter at the moment. And they offered him 3 dates to go to see them: 22nd of October, 31st of October, 5th of November. They say all of which you've refused while offering no alternatives. If you decide not to attend, we're likely to note this in our final report as evidence of the government's approach to this matter. Well, over the course of the next 50 minutes, I want to hear from you if you're affected by this, if you're affected by this whole loan charge scandal. And I do think it is a scandal. Give me a call. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. Well, Greg Mulholland joins me. He's from the Loan Charge Action Group. There's been a mass lobby day at Westminster today. He's also former Liberal Democrat MP for Leeds North West. Greg, good evening, first of all. We talked to your Lib Dem colleague, Stephen Lloyd, on the programme last night, who's taking this up in Parliament on behalf of people who are affected. What chance do you think there is of the government actually listening, and why do you think they are so sort of cloth-eared to this?
Well, good evening, Ian. Thank you very much for having me on and for the coverage of this issue. You've used the word cloth-eared, and that is exactly what's happening. And the truth here, and I'm someone who has been in and around politics as you have for many years, the government got this horribly wrong. Sometimes all governments of all parties make a bad policy. This is bad policy because they had no idea the impact it actually would have. The impact assessment that was done at the time didn't actually predict that there would be any impact on family stability, family breakdown. Already that's happening, and people today were giving their powerful experiences of that. They don't actually even know how many people will be made bankrupt. They don't even know how much money this would bring in if it was successful and everyone paid the tax that people say. And when bad policy is made, people should actually hold their hands up. And, I'm not here to attack Mel Stride or the government. I'm a campaigner now, ex-politician, I'm a campaigner. But this is wrong. And this is going to do huge damage to lots of individuals' lives. There were families there who'd taken a day out of their half-term to bring this to Parliament, to bring this to MPs. And some of the stories that you heard today were absolutely shocking. One woman came and spoke to one of the stewards, the Loan Charge Action Group stewards, who were doing an amazing job. And she just said, "I just need to speak to someone." And she said, "I'm here. I only got a letter. I only found out about this loan charge from HMRC 2 days ago." And she burst into tears because of what it would do to her and her family. It was unimaginable, actually, frankly. I can't imagine being hit with a bill that would make it impossible for you to survive, to live. And HMRC and Mel will say, "Oh well, they will come to agreements with you." Actually, those things are not possible. I met someone else who was paying £500 a month because he'd felt that he was pressured into doing that, and he actually had to borrow money to get his train fare down from the northeast. These are ordinary, hard-working people.
So the woman that you were talking about there, what was her job? What was she doing?
Well, she was a contractor. We also had nurses, doctors, supply teachers, social workers, lots of IT contractors, but people who were told to get professional advice. You and I, it could be the same for us, and of course there are similar issues of affected people in the media, as you know. People were told you have to do this. In some cases, people were forced into doing this. They weren't able. People, and one interesting thing that hasn't come out yet, interestingly, Ian, is actually there were some government departments and agencies who were contracting people who are now subject to the loan charge, and full enough, those departments have gone extremely quiet. So it's an absolute mess, and the message is simply, if a policy is badly implemented, badly planned, you don't know, you have to then have the decency and the courage to say, OK, we got this one wrong, and actually we will look at it again.
But you heard there that Mel Stride was completely unrepentant. He said it is about tax avoidance. Now, people across the political spectrum, I think, are probably united in that tax avoidance needs to be addressed, and the government will say, well, this is exactly what we're doing, we're addressing it.
But it isn't, is it? And at the same time that, let's face it, it is difficult to get the amount of tax we'd like to get out of Google and Amazon, and we all think we should do more. It's harder than actually sometimes opposition politicians and journalists may think. But simply to go after hard-working people because it's easy, and because actually they can't take a legal case, they can't fight. And when you have the accelerated payment notices legislation, which means that you don't have an independent right of appeal. So you get this bill, just like that woman did a couple of days ago. You don't have any independent right of appeal. You've got to pay, and you're guilty until proved innocent. And when the policy is wrong, when the loan charge is so unfair, you've made clear it's retrospective. It goes back 20 years. HMRC themselves don't have records going back 20 years. They destroy it after 7 years.
And somebody that I spoke to about this, or I read somewhere, I honestly can't remember, but I remember the detail of it, which is the important thing. This chap said that they were going back 20 years with him, and he said, well, I was unemployed for like year 17 to 18, and they said, well, give me the proof. He said, well, I haven't got the proof. And legally, you only have to keep records for 7 years. And so what they said they were going to do was to charge him for that year the average of all the other years. So he was actually paying tax on income that he hadn't earned.
Yeah, and this is why this is a campaign about justice. Never mind tax. This isn't about tax avoidance. And the great thing is today, with over 500, or over 400, nearly 500 people coming to see their MPs, ordinary people from all around the country doing all sorts of different things, just happening to be self-employed. Aren't we supposed to be celebrating, the modern way of working? I'm self-employed now. And they are facing a situation that they never created. They never went into this. If these people had said, well, I want to avoid tax, then maybe it would be different. They didn't. They simply wanted to get on, to work, to earn money, to service, the NHS in the case of the locum doctors and locum nurses, IT contractors who do important things, probably for LBC, but certainly for huge companies up and down the country, and they get taken on for a year to do what they need to do, and then they move on. They're not employees, and they never got any sick pay. They didn't get pension contributions. They didn't get anything when they took a week off to go on holiday, and now they're being hammered as if they did. And it's a mess.
And we're talking about people who are not on the higher end of the income spectrum. Okay, you talk about doctors. I mean, doctors probably are on the higher end, but most of the categories of people that you're talking about are not. They'll be on average, just above average earnings, I would say. But what are they being hit with? What kind of sums are they being asked to pay back?
I mean, some of the sums that people have shared with me are staggering. I met one person today, and there were much higher bills than this, but I met a man today who's 64. He's retired. He'll never work again. And he believed that having contributed, having worked hard, having paid taxes incidentally, and he, like everyone else, paid the taxes that at the time HMRC said were due. And he's just been hit with a bill for, I think he said, £147,000. And £147,000? And there are much higher bills. Some people are being faced with higher bills. So when Mel or the HMRC come on and say, it's fine because you can pay it off over 5 years, do the calculations. And actually, one of the calculations, this was circulated to MPs today, one of the calculations is that someone on not a huge salary would have to be on a deficit of over £200 every month simply to keep up with the HMRC payments. So it's not possible. So HMRC are not enabling people to get out of this. There is no way out of this for some people, apart from bankruptcy, which means losing homes, which means family breakdown, which is already happening. And as you already know, and you covered it when you spoke to Mel last time, there are desperate people. There are many people suffering from mental health conditions, from depression, anxiety. People were openly admitting that today, and there are people who are reporting to HMRC that they are feeling suicidal. And what did HMRC say? They said, oh, well, yes, if you report all your tax affairs and give us your bank account details and phone us between 8:30 and 4:30, then we'll speak to you about your tax affairs. It's outrageous. There is a real duty of care here, and I'm afraid to say that the Treasury and HMRC are ignoring that to justify what they now know was an absolute fiasco of policy making.
Well, Greg, stay with us. We're going to take some calls in a moment. 0345 6060 973. If you are somebody who's affected by this or potentially affected by this, I want to hear from you. But also on the wider question here, how can it be right to pursue people for retrospective taxation for 20 years? Now, we don't believe in retrospective legislation, so how can we believe in retrospective claiming of taxation particularly when all of these schemes were perfectly legal, some of them even encouraged by the Inland Revenue as it was in those days at the time, and yet people are facing imminent bankruptcy for this? How can that be right? And if you want to give me a call and say, well, it serves them right, they were trying to avoid tax, fine. Look, I don't necessarily want this to be just a whole hour of people agreeing with what I've said. I can't imagine that anybody can think this is a fair thing for the government to do, because it just simply is not. And this is where I think people lose trust and faith in politicians, where they see politicians who, I mean, Mel Stride, nice guy, actually, I would say one of the nicer people in Parliament, but clearly being persuaded by the Treasury that this is entirely right and he's going to completely swallow the Treasury line. Sometimes, you know, politicians have to stand up and say, I don't care what you're saying. This is not fair. It is not going to happen under my watch. That is what Mel Stride should be saying now, in my view, but feel free to disagree with me. 0345 6060 973. I don't think I would have lasted long as a minister, frankly, because I just wouldn't have accepted anything like this.
That's a compliment, I think.
Well, maybe. 19 minutes past 9.
This is LBC.
The real reason Sleeping Beauty fell asleep was because it was taking so long for the palace to sell. And the handsome...
Iain Dale on LBC.
22 minutes past 9. We're talking about the loan charge, which sounds a rather boring thing, but if you're affected by it, it's certainly not boring. You could be hit with tens of thousands of pounds going back in back taxes for 20 years. I personally think that it's completely iniquitous. I don't understand why the government aren't going to apparently change their minds on this. They won't even justify it. That I think really sticks in people's craw. However, they have sent us a statement which we're incredibly grateful for. They say the loan charge is designed to tackle contrived tax avoidance schemes where individuals were paid in loans, often through offshore trusts that they never had to repay. These payments have always been taxable and HMRC has never approved these schemes. We are encouraging people to settle now before the loan charge comes in. HMRC will do everything to support users to settle their tax affairs in the most manageable way possible. Well, I have one reaction to that. And that's the sound of me screwing up the statement. It is utterly ridiculous. Greg Mulholland is here from the Loan Charge Action Group. I mean, what's your reaction to that statement?
Well, it's the usual, misleading guff. I won't swear. A lot of people were swearing today, but it's really depressing, actually, to see governments and government departments and agencies saying things that are really inaccurate and misleading. And of course I have to point out that on your show, Mel Stride, the responsible minister, actually said that the schemes were illegal. They weren't. So actually he attempted, I think by accident, and I agree, Mel is a perfectly pleasant man who I think is trying to defend the indefensible, but he said that these schemes were illegal. They're not illegal. They have no opinion to say they're illegal. They were perfectly legal at the time. And also to say that, as he did, that HMRC were pursuing promoters. There's no evidence of that. There's not been... HMRC have refused all the FOI, Freedom of Information requests, to say how many prosecutions they've made, because there have been none. And this idea that HMRC are helping when actually their prosecution arm are taking people to court, are threatening bankruptcy, and are causing misery and are refusing to deal with the emotional stress that's happening. Well, it's just simply not true, and that is not good enough from our public servants.
Jay in Thurrock says, it's your choice to take advantage of currently legal tax avoidance schemes, but don't start crying when HMRC catch up with you. Well, the key bit there is currently legal. If something's currently legal, how can you blame anyone from availing themselves of it, particularly when they're generally operating under advice from accountants? So I wonder if there's a case to come after accountants on this. I don't know. Let's go to your calls. Lots of calls coming in. I'm going to ask you all to be reasonably brief, because I know this is a complicated subject, and the temptation will be to spend 10 minutes with one caller. But I've got so many calls coming in, I'm going to ask you to be as brief as you can. Matthew in Woking, you're first up.
Oh, hi. Good evening.
Hi.
I couldn't believe it when I heard this on the radio. I just simply had to ring in straight away. I've had my life completely ruined by HMRC and the APNs, the accelerated payment notices, and the loan charge. Basically, I was in a tax avoidance scheme for about 4 years. This was going back about 3 or 4 years now. My accountant recommended it to me. I've been self-employed for the last 15 years as an IT consultant. He said it was the best thing since sliced bread. It was perfectly legal and above board. Of course, they would never do anything that was illegal. Why would I do that? So I was in a scheme anyway. Suddenly HMRC start issuing these accelerated payment notices. I got 5 notices totalling about £70,000. I couldn't afford to pay them. And obviously I was really struggling. They just kept writing more and more letters, and the letters got more and more sort of severe, with them threatening penalties and fines and all sorts of things. And of course the loan charge, I was looking at a liability of about something in the region of £150,000. I actually, as a result of all that and the stress that it placed on me and my family, I actually declared bankruptcy in April. So it has completely destroyed me. As a sort of the only way I could get out of the situation, really, and try and absolve myself of it all. And as you say, Ian, I mean, they were all above board, perfectly legal, but what HMRC are saying is that effectively they've almost used retrospective taxation to try and go back and clarify the law, I think is the language that they've used.
But it's too late for you. If they did change their mind, it's too late for you, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I mean, I know of several other contractors that I worked with and have friends with, and they've all gone through the same thing. I mean, some of them are on the verge of bankruptcy, and some have already gone bankrupt, and it's been a horrendous time. I mean, as you can appreciate, I mean, obviously I've paid tax all my life and so on. I've never done anything illegal. I would never do anything illegal. And of course, you go into these schemes in good faith, and and then this happens to you, and I just can't understand it. I mean, I think Nigel Farage said something about Brexit a while ago, and he said, "Oh, we don't live in a banana republic," And I thought, well, actually, we do. I mean, that's how bad things are now with HMRC. They're completely out of control. It's crazy. It's just crazy. It just defies common sense, doesn't it?
I wish I could provide something rather than sympathy, because I think we all dread ending up in a position that you've been in, Matthew. Thank you very much. Karen's a new caller from Camden. Hello, Karen.
Hi, good evening, Ian. I just wanted to ring up and share my experience. So my partner's been caught up in this whole scandal. He was an IT contractor back in 2006. So as a contractor back then, you had the option to get paid by a limited company or an umbrella company. We were advised that limited company, you can't be a sole individual working, so we went for the umbrella company option. We were told by QC that this was completely legitimate and legal, so we went ahead with it, and he's been contracting for 6 years, and then a few years ago we received an APN which says that we now owe £160,000, which we're not in a position to pay, so we are now provisionally exploring the option of bankruptcy. My partner did every year a self-assessment, tax self-assessment, and there's a section in the form where you declare the arrangement, and not once in that 6-year period did HMRC ever say to us, "Hey guys, this isn't the correct way of getting paid. You need to review your arrangements." And never once did they ever give us those warnings or anything. So we just feel we've been robbed, really. We're just hardworking people. We've always paid our taxes. We've never been on benefits. And we're facing bankruptcy, which is terribly, distressing for us, really. But we've seen no way out of this.
And you've presumably been in touch with whoever your local MP is?
Yes, we did. We've been in contact with our MP, who was really supportive. But unfortunately, ultimately, he really understood our plight. But and I don't really understand the process and everything else. But we need to get more MPs involved to really get the retrospective aspect of this bill amended. And I think it's not an impossible journey, but it's certainly a challenging one for us to all go through. But, you know, in the meantime, we're left with this uncertainty hanging over us. And like I said, we are exploring the option of bankruptcy. And I think, you know, HMRC have been really irresponsible in this. You know, not once did they ever come forward and warn us. And these companies that we've been using in the past as umbrella companies are still operating now in the industry. So,
well,
you know,
I just hope that some of the civil servants who are in charge of this scheme are listening to this programme right now and have listened to those last two calls, and I'm sure we'll get some more of them as well. Karen, thank you very much. Just very quickly, Greg Mulholland, is there a political impetus now behind this? I mean, I know I saw Zach Goldsmith tweeting. I mean, are you getting MPs from all different parties behind this?
Yeah, very much so. And this is not a party political issue. I mean, you know, I think it's important just to say that this all started with the IR35 legislation brought in under Gordon Brown and the New Labour government. It was legislation to try to stop people who were really employed from pretending that they were self-employed. But it was very poor legislation, badly drafted. The Coalition, and I was in Parliament at the time, the Coalition then very much wanted to tackle genuine tax evasion and, you know, cynical tax avoidance, did some good things and did some things that probably weren't quite right. But now this is poor, so it's absolutely cross-party. This is not a party political issue. This is an issue of justice, and it's great that we had so many Conservative MPs being prepared to say this is wrong and be at the protest. Labour MPs, Liberal Democrats, you know, Plaid Cymru, an SNP, not many of those supporting so far, but yeah, absolutely, this is non-party political.
Well, Greg, we're going to let you go now because I want to concentrate on the calls for the next half an hour. Thank you very much, Greg Mulholland. He's from the Loan Charge Action Group. I'm sure they have a website where you can get more details of. I mean, if you're listening to this and thinking, "Oh my goodness, could I be stung for £150,000?" Well, you may want to look into this because it's the sooner you know what the situation is, I suppose, the better. You're listening to LBC. I'm Iain Dale. It's 9:32. Let's get the latest news headlines from Andy Ivey.
Leading Britain's conversation. Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
9:36 here on LBC. I'm being accused of being totally irresponsible and scaremongering by George Turner on Twitter, who's a former Lib Dem candidate. He says, just to be clear about the loan charge, it does only apply to people in disguised remuneration tax avoidance schemes. The idea being put out that this is all about freelancers is just wrong. It's not wrong. I would challenge you to talk to people who are on this protest today. And then I get an email here from... who's it from? From Don, who says, this tax business is a disaster. The NHS told temp nurses they would only be employed if they came through an umbrella agency who treated them as self-employed. Then HMRC told them what they had done was illegal. Amazing. And that's happened across the board. Now, any tax avoidance scheme, surely we have to accept that if the HMRC thinks it's wrong, well, they can then stop it. And they can say no one can sign up to this sort of thing in future. But you surely can't go after people who've done something that's perfectly legal. And particularly when they've taken professional advice and QCs and accountants have told them, well, this is what you should do. Laura's in Bethnal Green. Hello, Laura.
Hi.
What would you like to say?
Well, I'm actually a doctor, and I took 3 years out of my training so that I could locum. Now, the reason was because I wanted to travel and mainly to do volunteer work in India and Cambodia and other places. So over 3 years, I worked for 6 months so that I could have 6 months off to do volunteer work in hospitals abroad. But the hospital would only employ me if I went through an agency and I went through the loan charge. And I don't have any kind of financial acumen, so I joined a company, went through the loan charges, and I had to do this. Otherwise, as an NHS doctor, I wouldn't have the time off or the money and the kind of security, knowing that I could pay for my bills while I'm away and, you know, not earning any money with doing volunteer work. So then, over 3 years, the total amount is now 174,000,
wow.
And which is it's just incredible. And I'm having to sell my house. And even now, I'm back to being an NHS doctor. But the pay isn't great. I mean, I have to work an extra shift, like a 12-hour shift a month, just to keep up with bills. So even though I could pay it off over 5 years, I'm not going to be able to pay it off. And even though I sold my house, I'm only going to have £10,000 in profit. So I don't know. I'm really stuck. And it's not as though I could go back in time. And I don't know. I'm just kind of stuck.
Well, I completely understand why you're quite emotional about it. I think anybody would be, and you're kind of proving that you are exactly the kind of person that Greg Mulholland there was talking about. Somebody who's, I mean, you're trying to do your best, you're doing your job as best you can, and then you have this burden on top of you, and it's causing you a lot of stress.
It is, and I didn't. It's not as though I can go back in time. And the hospital, to do locum work so that I could do volunteer work and have that 6 months luxury off, I had to go through an agency. I had to do the loan charges. Otherwise, they wouldn't even employ me. And even the accountant signed me up for all of these things, setting up my own company. And if that was what everyone did, and then I just did it, I can't go back in time. So I don't see how they can then retrospectively go back. I don't know.
Well, I don't understand how it's even legal for them to do so, but no doubt they employ very expensive lawyers that have advised them that it is. Laura, thank you very much. Raj is in Leicester. Raj, what would you like to tell me?
Hi there, Ian. Interesting show. I've got no sympathy with any of these people whatsoever. I've been a locum dentist for 8 years, and my friend pointed out that I could do a remuneration trust 11 years ago. And I refused on the basis that I knew that it was tax avoidance. How can a doctor not realise that you're doing tax avoidance when you're putting money into a loan scheme and then getting paid back in loans? I've had to pay every penny of my tax in the last 7 or 8 years, right? And these people have been getting away with blue murder, paying an effective rate of 2 to 5% when the rest of us are paying 20-25%.
How do you work out that it's 2 to 5%?
Well, I haven't worked it out. That's an estimate. I guess I'm putting a figure in the air. But there were some of the figures that I heard.
But isn't the question here, was it legal or was it illegal? And we heard the Treasury Minister tell me a few weeks ago that it was illegal. But it clearly isn't illegal.
How is it not?
Well, let me read you a text here from Graham, who says, I was in a scheme from 2001 to 2007. Inquiry letters received for 3 of those years stated HMRC would let me know if there was tax to pay. That was 9 years ago. Then nothing, not even formal notification of the loan charge. So nobody was trying to hide anything. These were perfectly legal schemes.
No, but they're getting paid in a loan that they're never going to pay back. The HMRC cannot pick up someone who's fraudulently pretending that there's a loan in their tax account that's not really going to ever be paid back. It's not theoretically a loan if it's never going to be paid back. So they've never picked it up because of the way it's been structured. But the person doing it, they should realise that if you're self-employed, and I'm not talking about every person, I don't know of every situation, but the 2 dentists I know, they've been doing it for 7 or 8 years. And they know actively what they're doing. They say it's legal, but I'm getting away with it, basically. And I'm going to do it until they catch me. And now they've been caught. Why should I complain? All the other taxpayers have been paying the actual rates. I
think the logical thing for you to think is, then the government should change the rules so these things are clearly illegal. Now, we have to make a difference here between tax avoidance and tax evasion. Because some people, I saw a tweet earlier saying, well, I've got no sympathy with these people if they're evading tax. Well, they're not evading tax. You might accuse them of avoiding tax, but there is a very, very subtle difference, isn't there?
Well, there is a difference, but is avoiding tax, is avoiding tax a crime?
Having an ISA is avoiding tax, isn't it?
Is it?
Yes, it is.
That's illegal. That's a legal scheme that exists.
Yeah, no. So were these schemes legal? That's the point.
Not when people actively know. Yeah, before they enter in the remuneration trust, they're being told in indirect language that this is a tax avoidance scheme, and they know that every other person who earns 40 grand a year, 50 grand a year is paying tax at the normal tax rates.
Yes, I know, but that's because they're employed. If you are self-employed, you're in a very different status. You're not getting holiday entitlement, holiday pay. You're not getting.
I'm self-employed. I don't get holiday entitlement. I have to pay my national insurance. But I chose not to go in a remuneration trust because I knew it was avoidance. I mean, doctors not knowing that it's avoidance. Yeah, I wouldn't trust a doctor. If a doctor can't tell that's an avoidance scheme.
I don't agree with you, because I think, look, most people who aren't accountants, I mean, they regard anything to do with their tax affairs as a bit of an irritation, because I don't understand tax law. I never want to understand tax law. So therefore, I employ an accountant to handle it for me and to give me advice. Now, okay, if I think the accountant's incompetent or giving me wrong advice, fine, I'll find another one. But, I mean, normally you would take the professional advice of an accountant who advises you to do something, wouldn't you? Otherwise, why have them?
I do my own tax affairs, to be fair.
Well, I don't, because I don't think I'm not competent enough to fill in the tax form, so I have an accountant to do it for me.
Yeah, but it doesn't take that much. If you know the general rules of tax, yeah, it doesn't take that much common sense.
But I don't, and therefore I have someone to do it for me.
Your personal limit is 10 grand. You know your personal limit is 10 grand, and you know after about. Well, I think
actually it's about 11.5 now, isn't it?
Well, around. Okay,
therefore disproving the fact that I don't know anything about tax.
Well, there you go. You know simple things. You know the income tax bands probably, that 20% and 40% maybe, and you know roughly where they start.
Yeah, obviously those things are Googleable, but I look at that. I look at the self-assessment tax form, and honestly, it just makes me go blind. So I therefore get someone else to do it.
Yeah, you do, and so many people have. But you know, these schemes are not entirely legal. When people are telling you, when a professional accountant's going to you, look, you can have a loan, but you never really pay it back. That's what they were getting told at the end of the day. I actually contacted HMRC about remuneration trusts about 5 years ago. I actually sent an email saying people are tax avoiding through this, please investigate.
Well, what can I say? I mean, look, I think there is...
Why should I pay more so they can pay less?
Well...
Why should I pay more? We're earning the same. People should back their own country.
I'm not saying that you should, but I think it is unfair to go back 20 years when the rule of thumb is you can only ever go back 7 years, because most people don't keep records for 20 years. There's only a legal obligation to keep records for 7 years, so therefore people dispose of them. I couldn't tell you what my income was back in 2001. Can't even remember what I was doing in 2001, to be honest. Anyway, more of your calls to come. Raj, thank you for giving the counter point of view. It's 9:46.
Coming up at 10 on LBC, Tom Swarbrick.
5 explosive devices sent to the Clintons, Obamas and senior Democrats.
Iain Dale on LBC.
It's 11 minutes to 9 here on LBC. If you want to look up the details of this, if you think you might be affected, go to the Loan Charge Action Group website, and I'm sure there'll be some details on there. Look, I'm not qualified to go into the exact details of this. All I can say is that from the research I've done, from the people that I've been hearing from, not just today, but on social media, and lots of people have emailed me about this, there is a real issue here, and to me there seems to be a great unfairness. You can find, as Raj disapproves of tax avoidance, and he's absolutely entitled to do so, he's absolutely right to do so in many ways. But if something is legal, sure, and people have taken professional advice, surely they shouldn't be penalised for it retrospectively. Fine, cut it off now and say, well, in future you've got to pay like anyone else. Absolutely agree with that. But somebody here is got a text addressed to Raj saying, is Raj okay with his fellow men and women being made homeless and bankrupt and being driven to suicide? Really, Raj, you okay with that? Martin's in Muswell Hill. Martin, what would you like to say?
Hello, Ian. Lovely to speak to you again. I've been on the receiving end of APNs, and I'm staring down the barrel of paying a loan charge in April of next year. The APNs I faced were a total of £65,000, which hit in 1 year on top of my normal tax liabilities. I've been a self-employed IT consultant since 1994. I was in an umbrella company for basically about 2 years. The estimates that I got from the APNs bore no relevance, even to the data that I'd provided to HMRC at the time. I don't know how to describe it. I've lost what is effectively feels like about 4 years of my life. I've lost my life savings giving money over to these guys. I've worked day in, day out to make sure that I can maintain my home, that my wife and kids don't miss out on anything. And every Saturday morning you come downstairs to another brown envelope. It basically feels like HMRC have set a group of snipers off taking out the easy targets rather than going after the guys that are really actually doing wrong.
So what do you say to Raj when he says you knew what you were doing, you were avoiding tax?
I did nothing wrong. I did nothing wrong. When you've got a brochure that says this has been authorised by these tax specialist companies and this QC is authorising this, and then there's a line on the form on your return that says on your tax return that says how much have you received in loans this year, how much have you done, and you then put that back, and there's no question about it from HMRC. They facilitated this. They have enabled it. They've enabled this situation through IR35 causing people to behave in this way, and then through their own lack of enforcement or their own lack of insight to say people are going to get hurt here going forward, and they've allowed people to effectively hurt themselves. So they've gone after them.
What do you estimate your marginal tax rate to have been during this period? Because Raj was saying it would be 2 or 5%. Now, if that's true...
No. I think my marginal tax rate in that time was probably about 26 to 27% on the scheme that I was on. And bearing in mind that I haven't had sick pay in 30 years, I've had no pension paid for me in 30 years, I've had no holiday paid for me in 30 years, and I'd managed to save some money up that I was hoping to be a nest egg, which I've had to give to HMRC, otherwise they were going to take my house off me.
I'll tell you what, Martin, you've been stung for 65,000. How would you feel if you were stung for 250,000? Because we're about to talk to one of them. His name's Andrew, he's in Oxford. Andrew, you were on this lobby today at Parliament. What were you telling MPs?
Basically, what I was trying to put across, Ian, effectively that this wasn't some mercurial attempts by people sat on yachts stroking white cats to work out how they could avoid tax. For most people, this was basically just a payroll mechanism that was sold to them, not just by standalone accountants, as family accountants sort of thing. This was sold by big companies who had the marketing, the websites, and everything like that. And I think some of your previous callers have alluded to that.
Did the marketing, though, have the words, "This scheme is approved by Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs"?
Pretty much, yes.
Well, it's it either did or it didn't.
Well, what would happen is that you would call them, and you would ask, have this approved? And they would basically state that the HMRC have had oversight to it, they've approved it. In fact, we've got some information starting to come through now where they've actually been recommended by the HMRC when people have actually called back in sort of the early noughties and what have you. And as the previous caller, Martin Muswell Hill, alluded to, that effectively quite often that they have this QC stamp of approval on them. They have big companies. They also did your self-assessment return for you and this type of thing. So it was for very busy people doing sort of 12, 16-hour days that, as you've said before, aren't tax experts, aren't accountancy experts, or lawyers. They're basically just normal people.
So do you not think...
just needing a payroll as a self-employed.
Do you not think the accountants and the QCs have some questions to answer here? Maybe there should be a class action against the people that were recommending these schemes.
Without a shadow of a doubt. But the thing is, Ian, that has already happened with the Rangers versus the HMRC case. Maybe Greg could sort of elaborate on this a little bit a little later on. But effectively, the HMRC... basically won a case against Rangers, a very well publicised case, and that was the outcome of the case. HMRC have completely ignored that precedent and are now still going after the little guy.
Andrew, we have to leave it there. Thank you very much. Ian's in Liverpool. Ian, your point, please.
Hello, hiya. I'm actually meeting up once a week at the moment with a friend of mine who's been involved in all this. He has twice tried to end his life, so I'm very keen to keep a close eye on him afterwards. Now, he was a medical doctor. He didn't really understand what he was getting into with these things. He actually just spoke to an agency and said, he didn't want to deal with all the paperwork and things of running a company. Of course, now with the public sector IR35 blanketing that's in force, he wouldn't have that option, but back then he did. And what they did to him was they said, well, we've got an umbrella scheme that solves that. It's completely legal. QC approved all the other things you have been saying.
Yeah.
Now, he wasn't, as you say, he wasn't tax savvy. He didn't really understand this. For him, it was a way of avoiding paperwork. And actually, he didn't save a penny in tax. They paid him exactly the amount he would have earned otherwise. Now, he's now being hit with a life-destroying bill. I mean, he'll have to sell his house, he'll go bankrupt, it'll affect his family, and obviously he's in a very, very dark place as a result of it.
How much is he being hit for?
It's £180,000.
You see, these are sums of money which most of us could not contemplate. I mean, there's no way I could manufacture up £180,000 just like that. And I'm sure people think I'm paid lots more than that every year, if only that were the case. The only thing that we can do, frankly, and I guess it's what you're doing, Ian, is offer kind of tea and sympathy and just try and listen. Yeah. And, I mean, all I can do is, and I have done this a couple of times when I've sort of been chatting to politicians, I've said, look, are you aware of this issue? And so far, every single one of them has said no. Well, I think after today, with this lobby of Parliament, and hopefully, I mean, politicians do listen to this programme, I hope we've raised the visibility of it a little bit, because I don't know how any government minister can look themselves in the mirror in the morning and think that people who are probably natural... I mean, let's go down to the dirty politics of this. Most of the people that we're talking about here are probably instinctive Conservative voters. And yet, they're going to feel betrayed by their own government, in a way. Now, I'm not saying that government should just pander to their own voters, but these people are often in public service, they're often entrepreneurial, and yet they are being punished for, it seems to be, no apparent reason. Retrospective taxation has never been something which this country indulged in, and it shouldn't in the future. I'll be back tomorrow, won't I? It's not Thursday yet. I will be back tomorrow from 7 here on LBC. Coming up at 1, it's Darren Adam. Next, it's Tom Swarbrick.
Ian, thank you very much indeed. Welcome to the show. Tonight...